Welcome to Grow and Go with me, Tyler. This is for the ones who keep showing up again and again, hungry for more of God, but weary of striving. If you've ever felt stuck, worn out, or unsure of how to move forward in faith, you're in the right place. Here we grow, not by our own effort, but by leaning into what God has already done, and we go, not in exhaustion, but in the freedom He gives. Sometimes I'll be sitting down with guests to learn from their journeys. Other times it will be just you and me, diving into scripture, unpacking messages I've shared, or wrestling through what it means to walk this out in real life. Wherever you are, on a walk, in the car, folding the laundry, take a breath, settle in, and let's grow and go together.
Joining me on the podcast today is Hope Virgo. She is an award-winning author and international advocate for people with eating disorders. As Secretariat for the UK's all-party parliamentary group on eating disorders, she uses her own powerful story to drive change across schools, workplaces, hospitals and government. She is the founder of the #DumpTheScales campaign, which successfully pushed eating disorders onto the national agenda, led to meetings at Number 10, and even inspired the UK's first eating disorder march in 2023. Hope is a regular voice in the media. She's appeared on the BBC, Sky News, ITV, many places. And Hope continues to campaign for better access to treatment and funding, reminding all of us that no one with an eating disorder is untreatable. So Hope, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm so glad that we are talking about a topic that maybe feels heavy or scary or a little bit like, oh gosh, can we really talk about this out loud? Because I grew up going to an all-girls school. It was a very great school. I loved it very much. But eating disorders absolutely were rampant and normal in our community. And we're talking, dare I say it, like 30 years ago. That makes me feel really old. And yet, even now, it's not something that I think is addressed as much as it should be. So obviously your work is changing that. But before we get into all of that, we'd love to just know a little bit more about like day-to-day Hope. What does life look like? Is there a normal 24 hours in any given week? What are the things that kind of make you when you're not campaigning and advocating?
Good question. Life right now feels very chaotic. I've got a 6-month-old baby and a 3-year-old.
Wow, busy.
So yeah, it's just a bit, nothing for me. Well, I didn't feel like anything could set me up for that. And it's wonderful, but also just kind of, chaos. I think that's what makes every day so different. And then trying to squeeze in kind of campaigning work around being a mum, and also having high expectations on myself to be kind of doing every aspect of my life perfectly, which is a ridiculous pressure to put on myself. But yeah, we have... Yeah, I normally get up. My toddler does 2 mornings a week at preschool, and then a morning with my mum. And on those days, actually, my 6-month-old sleeps because he's not got the toddler around to probably entertain him. So it's always quite nice. And then I try and do campaigning work then. And then normally have the afternoons that we go out and do stuff. My toddler's got a lot of energy. So doing a lot of, they're both boys. And I think boys, again, this is going to sound very gendered and stereotypical, but they have so much energy. And a lot of it's kind of just going out into the woods and exploring and riding their bikes and stuff just to kind of, get them ready for bed.
Yeah, I think oftentimes toddlers are like puppies, like you need to exercise them. Otherwise, everything is wild and unruly.
Yes.
And but if they've had a good run around, then they'll sleep better. I think that's all of us, isn't it? Okay, so Hope, let's go back to the beginning of wherever you feel like the beginning is for you. Just tell us a little bit of your story. What led to Hope being the campaigner, the advocator, the national voice to say, hang on a minute, guys, we need to pay attention to eating disorders?
So I developed an eating disorder when I was about 12, 13 years old. At the time, I had no idea what it was. I didn't think there was anything the matter with me. And I just thought it was just something I was doing. I think the thing with eating disorders is they're similar to addictions in some sense, that they give you this kind of instant kind of relief, this instant value. when you do that behavior. So originally kind of started off dieting here and there. And I realized that the more that I dieted and the more exercise I did, the better I began to feel about every single thing going on around me. And over the next kind of 4 or 5 years, I kind of plummeted like into a full-blown eating disorder. But again, like I said, had no idea what was really happening at that time. And I think the really scary thing for me, but also for other people with eating disorders, is it kind of tricks you. So it tells you that if you keep doing these behaviors, everything in life will be fine. Everything will just work itself out. And I longed for everything to be okay. And I longed for myself to feel good enough. I longed to feel okay in who I was. And I felt like the eating disorder was giving me all of these things that I really, really wanted. And there were points during that time when I thought, do you know what, actually, I need to take a bit of a step back. Like, what's happening? Like, why do I feel the way I feel? Why can't I eat? Why can't I drink? Like, why do I need to exercise without feeling like all this guilt around it? And I couldn't get why all my friends could just do everything they wanted to do with food, with exercise, whatever it was. And I just couldn't do that. But whenever I had these thoughts, I'd then be like, oh no, it's okay. Just do one more day of this and everything will be fine. So it was kind of like this promise, and the goalposts within that just kept shifting. If you get to X weight, everything will be fine. If you eat X amount, everything will be fine. But whenever you hit that marker, it kind of pushes itself a little bit further. I think looking back, I now know a huge amount about eating disorders. I know kind of all the contributing factors, the genetics behind things. But at the time, if someone had asked me what was going on or what had caused this behavior, I would have had no idea. And even I was eventually admitted to an inpatient hospital to kind of help me start that recovery. And at that moment, again, I still had no real idea why that I developed one, what was going on. I'm one of 5, and I was the only one that developed a full-blown eating disorder. So I was like, why is it me? We now know that people have a genetic predisposition to develop an eating disorder. And then you have these contributing factors. So someone then goes into a period of restriction or malnourishment or over-exercise. And it's that causes the eating disorder and those kind of maladaptive behaviors around calorie counting, body image, everything like that. And for me, I think one of the biggest contributing factors was when I was 12 years old, I was sexually abused. And I remember going through that kind of period in my life. And when it ended, I was left with so much shame and so much guilt around it. And I felt categorically wrong with who I was. And it was that narrative, I think, that the eating disorder really latched onto and wanted to change for me. And I think the thing is, and I think particularly kind of nowadays, is you don't have to go through abuse to feel like there's something wrong with you. I think so many people, like people of all genders, backgrounds, races, people of all different ages, so many of us have that narrative in our heads that there's something categorically wrong with us. And we try to find these solutions to it. And we try to find these quick fixes. And the really scary thing is that society tells us that if you feel wrong in yourself, the one thing you can do to make you not feel wrong is to change what you look like, buy some new clothes, get your hair done, things like that. And you kind of lose sight of actually what it is what's the problem, and then what actually can help solve that. And I think, so for me, it was that kind of factor, I think, that really pushed this whole thing to develop. So like I said, you've kind of fast forward throughout my teens. Again, I'm sure people relate to this. If you've got maybe kids who are struggling with eating disorders, I rebelled a lot throughout my teens, kind of constantly going out. I lied a lot just to kind of get out of that kind of family environment. And then eventually my school got in touch with my mum. I went to the Children's Adolescent Mental Health Services as an outpatient, and then was finally admitted to an inpatient unit where I spent a year kind of learning about recovery, learning to eat, learning to exercise in the right way, and getting to a space where my brain was able to start to rewire and kind of understand how to live outside of this. And I think for me, like, that is, I guess, like, why I campaign nowadays is I was lucky enough to get that treatment. And don't get me wrong, I've had periods, I came out of hospital over a decade ago, and I've had moments in that time when I've relapsed, when I've needed to get treatment again. I've had moments when I found things really tough. Having 2 kids now, like going through a pregnancy when you've had an eating disorder is so challenging. Like, it's hard enough anyway, but you throw an eating disorder into the mix, and there's all this kind of, I don't know, disordered thinking around food when you're pregnant that people are telling you. Everyone's projecting everything onto you.
Everyone has an opinion, for sure. Everyone will tell you what you should and shouldn't eat. And they will often be contradictory advice at the same time.
That's the thing, isn't
it? Absolutely, yeah.
So I think for me, it's like experiencing something firsthand and then also realizing that you can get to a space where you can fully recover, where you can
Mm.
understand your brain a lot more. And I think at the moment, the reality is for so many people with eating disorders is they're stuck in this kind of space where they aren't getting the right treatment, stuck in this kind of functional phase where they're functioning at a high level, but they're still really unwell. And it's
Yeah.
those people who really do also deserve to get the right treatment, the right support. And so I guess that's one of the main reasons why I campaign, is to make sure that actually no one has to go through what I've been through. And
Mm.
again, looking at it from having kids now, like I know that my children are at a higher risk of developing an eating disorder because of the genetics. So again, creating an environment and trying to create a world where actually they're not going to go on and develop an eating disorder
Yeah.
either.
Yeah. As a parent, I know that I don't have a healthy relationship with food. It's something that I've battled with for decades. And even now, I still am processing with God, like, what is it right thinking about this? What's not right thinking? What, how much of identity plays into it? How much, shame plays into it, especially as Christians. I think it can be really hard. We think that we're supposed to be perfect and have everything sorted because we've got Jesus.
Mm.
And actually we're walking through life with these challenges. What would you say to somebody who is a Christian, they love God, and they have disordered relationship with food, or they have an eating disorder, or this is an area that is really live and topical for them? How would you encourage them in terms of how their faith interplays with all of the other layers of identity and shame and confusion and despair that it's always going to be this way? And also, I'm extra failure because I'm a Christian and I should have been able to pray it away by now.
Yeah, and do you know what? I feel like I've been through so many, if not all of those emotions, even
Yeah.
over like the last year or so as well. Again, like even when I struggle kind of more broadly with my mental health, you still have those moments where you're like, oh, I cannot believe this is still happening. I think particularly if you're someone who's lived with an eating disorder or disordered eating for a very long period of time, you get to that space where you just feel so defeated by it, and it feels so heavy to kind of carry it around all the time. And I think for me, a big thing is just trying to be honest about it. Like, find people around you that you can surround yourself with who can help you to navigate it, get to a space where in yourself you can kind of trust that on the other side of the fear of recovery, actually, what does that look like? And I know for me, during the pandemic, actually, I was finding it really challenging with food again. And I kind of sat down with one of my friends and was like, do you know what's that fear? Like, what is my worry about the
Mm.
other side? And like,
Uh-huh.
you can start off at like quite a superficial level and think, do you know what, actually, like, I had a restrictive type of eating disorder, and a lot of that's for me was wrapped up as well, like in your body image plays a part because it becomes a maladaptive behavior. Like, again, was it because I was afraid of my body changing? Was it I was afraid of what people would think? And I had to like really start to understand it. And I think for me, when
Mm.
I managed to get to a space where I could shift some of that fear and trust that on the other side of that, things would be okay.
Yeah.
And I think as well, like, getting to a space where you can confidently speak to yourself in the right way. I went through a period, and I was actually, I never say this about anything, but I was actually very good at it. Every time I had like a negative thought about my body, I would counteract it with something that I've read in the Bible or a positive affirmation, something like
Yeah.
that. And I began to kind of, again, rewire my brain in that
Yeah.
sense. I'm pretty awful at that right this second, probably. But there was, like I said, this period where I was like, actually, I'm kind of was getting into this habit of making myself do it. And I think
Mm.
that's the thing as well, like being really mindful of how we are speaking over ourselves
Yes.
and the things that we're saying. But I think the reality is, and I know that so many people have said to me things like, oh, it doesn't matter, like you're so much more, like your worth doesn't come from your body, like all of this sort of stuff. And I'd be like, yeah, but that doesn't get us through that kind of pain. And the reality is, when you're in recovery from an eating disorder, you have to go through the pain and everything like that to break every single aspect that's kind of holding you back. And
Uh-huh.
alongside that, you have to start to fuel yourself properly, because if we're not fueling ourselves properly, our brains aren't going to recover. And so we have to
Yeah.
have that nourishment alongside that. And again, I think so much of the time as Christians, I know I did this, you forget that. You think, do you know what, actually, I'm going to put all of this on just having a quick prayer, everything will be healed. I can stay the way that I look, everything will be fine. But actually, that's just not the reality. You have to do the other work as well alongside it.
And so if somebody is listening and they're going, okay, well, where do I start to do this work? Like, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I recognize that, you know, there is fear about my body changing, fear of not being in control of a situation, fear of all sorts of different things. Like, where would you suggest somebody starts with either getting the help externally they need, or even just on a really, like you've mentioned it and we've talked about it on the podcast before about neuroplasticity and rewiring our minds and being transformed? Like, this is a godly biblical truth, but also a scientific truth from neuroscience, which is amazing, that our brains can create these new neural pathways and they can help us live differently, but it does take that kind of repetition. We have to do these things again and again. We can't just do it once and then go, okay, now I'm fixed, I'm never going to battle this ever again. Like, what are the starting blocks to finding support or health or freedom?
So I think it would depend very much on where you're at, and I guess what type of eating disorder you have as well. But I think for me, for the main bit, I think we all need to go to our doctors. We all need to, first of all, have that conversation.
Yes.
And actually say, we're really struggling with this. I always suggest that people go and get their bloods done, just to get kind of this base marker of actually where things are at. Again, your bloods don't always show up what's going on to the extent that they might be, but I think it is a really good starting point anyway. Once you've done that, being very aware that you might not get support from an eating disorder service. At the moment, obviously, we know they're really overstretched. Everything's really challenging in that sense. But don't see that as a reason not to get support, but kind of having that conversation. I think looking at what support is around you. So whether that's directly through your churches, your communities, through friends, through family, again, what would that look like for you and how can people get behind you and kind of help you with that? It might be really practical things. So it could be that you really struggle to go to a supermarket and get the food that you need. So maybe making a list of things that you would feel happy eating and get someone else to go and do that for you. Again, having people that might kind of text you around meal times saying, oh, have you eaten today? Or what are you going to have for dinner tonight? Again, kind of offering that space. Again, really practically, if you find eating on your own challenging, think about what that might look like. Who can you invite alongside that? It doesn't have to be someone that's there in person, but it could be that you kind of have someone on FaceTime or kind of just texting someone throughout. Or even just taking a picture of your food and sending it to someone saying, you know, I've had this today. Do you think this is okay? Do you think this is enough? Again, for me, I know when I've done that in the past, it kind of helps again alleviate some of that guilt. And then I think beyond that, if you're someone who's a bit further along in your recovery, identifying what things that you're afraid of. I know for me, so I had a number of foods that I was terrified of having. And again, it probably sounds ridiculous to people, like, how can you be terrified of food? But there were a few things that I was like, God, I just cannot have that. And I don't know 100% what the fear was around it. A lot of the time, I probably had some ideas, but never really got to the bottom of it. So what I did actually during the pandemic was, at the start of every month, I kind of identified 5 different foods or behavior changes that I wanted to make. And I would make myself have those foods or do the change of behavior every single week. And it wasn't like you can do it once. You have to do it again and again and again. And the more you do it, the more you realize that actually you don't have to be terrified about it, but also the easier it gets. I remember one of my big challenges was when in the pandemic you were allowed, when we could go for that walk to get a takeaway coffee, and that was like one of the things we could do. Me and my husband used to go out on a Friday morning and we'd walk up the road. I was living in London at the time, to Wandsworth Common, and we'd get a coffee and a pastry from the Cafe Nero up there, and then we'd like walk around the Common once and go home. And the first time we did it, I was like, I must have talked about that pastry for about 3 or 4 days afterwards. My husband was like, how can you talk about a pastry this much? I was like, I don't know. I was like, I literally did. But like, after kind
it's
of 6,
on my
7
mind,
weeks,
it's coming out my mouth.
Yeah, literally. I was like, but I must sound like a stuck record. But within kind of 6, 7 weeks of doing this, I didn't need to talk about it. I also didn't feel like I had to manage kind of compensatory behaviors throughout the day. So it all just got a bit easier. And I think, again, that's the thing. It's that, like you said, that training of our brain to get to that space where actually it can shift things and things can be okay. I think that's for me, was a really big thing anyways, to do that. Kind of constantly. And I think as well, like beyond that, I think it's really challenging because I think so much of the time churches don't really understand eating disorders to the extent they are. And I think that stops people talking about them. So I think that's why, as thinking broadly as churches, we need to be actually thinking, how can we empower people to be talking about eating disorders, disordered eating, but also how can we create an environment where people can still come into the church when there is food around.
I was going to say, because churches are like notorious for let us feed you. Like we just, like there's always food, there's always kind of, and there's not always like healthy options. Like, so if somebody is wanting to be careful, and I say this like for the other end of the spectrum as well, like we hear eating disorders and we automatically assume, or disordered eating, automatically assume that that's people who are not eating enough in some form or way. But you've got the other end of the spectrum where people are not able to steward their bodies well because they are overeating or they are consuming too much. And equally, it's like church can be a space for both ends of the spectrum where food is actually a real challenge. And how do we create spaces that are still serving food? Because like Jesus, when he hung out with people, it was often around food, but in a way that honors the fact that people might be on very different journeys and in like quite challenging spaces mentally when it comes to food. Like if you were in charge of all the churches across the nation, what would your advice be to the kind of teams who are thinking about, we want to love people well around how we serve food and the value we place on food within our church community?
Yeah. And, I've thought about this so much. And I still think about it to the extent that actually I've got an event next week in Parliament, and we've had so many conversations about whether we're going to serve food at the event. And we don't want to push restrictive eating, so we kind of feel like we should have food there. But then at the same time, we don't want to ostracize people or make people feel uncomfortable. And it is. And I think that's the thing with churches, kind of more broadly. Whenever I've done anything with the church, there's always been that selling point that, oh, come to this because there'll be food there. And actually, it's just, for some people, that doesn't work. So for me, I did the Alpha course in 2019. And I kind of made my small group kind of leader aware of my history very briefly, like not to the extent of it, but kind of flagged it. Because I didn't want it to be the food that stopped me going to the event, like the meetings. So what she used to do was message me every single Wednesday morning and tell me what was going to be available that evening.
Wow, that's amazing.
It was really and it was like quite a basic thing, but actually for me it meant that I was still able to go and kind of participate and get involved.
And you were able to process that yourself before showing up and not like having that fear of what is going to be presented to me in this moment, or what am I going to be faced with. That's a really simple but cool thing.
And it really helped me. Another thing I think for me, which was useful, was having buffets. So I find a buffet actually kind of all right. I know some people won't, but actually, again, for me, that was what I guess that was where I was at in that moment. So kind of maybe having that conversation. If you know people who have eating disorders within your church, again, asking them like, do you think a buffet would work better today? Or would you prefer us to have a sit-down meal, something like that as well? So kind of opening up that. And then I think more broadly, like just being really mindful of how we talk about food. I would argue that in society now, we've completely normalized eating disorders. We've normalized disordered eating to some extent. And like we all do it. I've been in churches before, and not just churches, but kind of generally, like when you go to events, people say things like, oh, I'm going to eat this because I'm not going to have lunch, or I went to the gym this morning so I can have this. And it's like, whilst we don't think
justifying
that it's harmful,
eating.
Yeah, exactly. Like it can be really triggering for people with eating disorders. It can be triggering for people in recovery. So I think creating that environment where actually we don't talk about food like that, but actually we talk about it in a much safer way. And then also, again, like, I think so much of the time, generally, we comment on what people are eating. We kind of say, oh, have you seen this? Or whatever it might be, like, oh, so-and-so's having this, or so-and-so's put on this much weight, or they've lost this much weight. And again, it's all of these conversations that, again, they might be really harmless, but actually we never know what's going on for someone. You might have someone who's lost weight or gained weight because they're grieving. They might not have an eating disorder, but actually there's something else that's kind of going on for them. And so I think, again, being really careful of that. And then my other, I think, kind of wider issue is a lot of the time within churches, but also again across society, is you come to January and all these people set like these steps, like I'm going to walk X amount of steps a day, or as a church, we're going to try and do this or whatever it is. And actually, again, whilst I'm sure that there's no bad intentions behind any of this, it's kind of, again, glorifying exercise and kind of normalizing perhaps people with exercise addictions and that disordered eating. So I think a lot of it is, whilst I would never say you shouldn't serve food in your church, because I think we do need to offer that to some extent. Actually, we need to get to a space where we're making it easier and safer for people with eating disorders to come into the building and not feel guilty if they're not having something, or not feeling different or odd. And for me, that's a big, I think that feeling of feeling wrong in yourself, which obviously I've felt a huge amount throughout my life. Again, like that can get exacerbated when you walk into a church and everyone's having a meal together, and it's put me off before, it's put other people off before, and trying to, again, just make it work. And my one exception around food is I was part of a small group when I was in going to a church in London. And obviously a big thing for them was all having a meal together. I ended up not being able to go to the small group because I wasn't in the best place in my recovery at that time. And it was really disappointing, actually, because I kind of tried to talk about it with the person, and it hadn't really gone very well. I don't think they really fully understood kind of eating disorders, which isn't their fault, obviously. But I think if you do have someone who has an eating disorder who's coming to your small group, again, what can be done to make sure that they don't kind of stop coming? And if they do stop coming, trying to open up that conversation. And it might be that if you do have someone for a term, you just don't serve food at a small group. It won't make the small group any worse. It just changes things up a little bit.
I think there's so much that you've said there, Hope, that is so challenging. Particularly, I want to go back to what you're talking about, how we're talking about food and how we're talking about bodies, exercise, all these sorts of things. Obviously, your little ones are still really little right now. And this is a space that you are an expert in, you understand the ins and outs, the science of it, that you've had your personal experience of walking through this as well. I can remember growing up and my mum always talking about her weight, always talking about the numbers. That definitely has impacted me. And I can remember when I was having my babies thinking, I don't want to do that. And inadvertently, I think there have been times, if I'm not in a super healthy place mentally with food, I might speak things out in front of my kids or all the rest of it. So how can we as parents educate our children about the importance of eating well without going down to the point of getting into extremes of this is good, this is bad, but also not just letting them eat sugar all the time, because that isn't going to be nourishing to their bodies and helping them grow and all the rest of it. You know, there's certain things we know about nutrition that we want to pass on to our children without then making it a really unhealthy message. So how do we, like for the person who's listening and they're really fearful of passing on their own issues or their own challenges to their children or to their friends and family around them, what can they do, or how can they be mindful of their language around food?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to just say is parents don't cause eating disorders. So if you've talked about dieting to your children or you've had those conversations, it doesn't cause an eating disorder. And I think, again, so much of the time, parents and carers completely blame themselves when their kids have an eating disorder. So I guess just to kind of put that out there. But I do think, having a healthy relationship and environment around food is really, really important. Firstly, really practically, like in our house, so we make sure that we have no kind of negative conversations around meal times. There's no kind of volatile behaviors. We don't use food as a punishment, saying things like, if you've been naughty today, you've got to go to bed without your supper. Like, again, things like that, which I think as kids, we probably had stuff like that. So again, being really mindful of that. And again, making sure that meal times are like this neutral space. They don't have to be really happy clappy all the time, but they're just a neutral space. We also know from the research that if you have had an eating disorder and your kids are at a heightened risk, they are more likely to develop one. And one of the ways, again, to counteract that is to sit down with your kids at least 5 times a week and eat a meal with them. So again, that's something that we've tried to instill in our family. And again, like, I'm just started weaning my 6-month-old, and it's challenging, isn't it? Well, like, it's challenging. I think you've got loads more children. I feel like
I've
more
got
children.
3.
Okay,
yeah, I've got 3. Not loads, but one extra.
But it does, I think, and it is really hard. Like, the baby will sit in the high chair at the moment for like, I don't know, 5 minutes, and then he'll get bored, at which point the toddler then gets bored, and you're like, oh goodness. And like I will walk around the house spoon feeding them if I have to, because I know that they won't sleep through the night. I also know how important the food is for them. And at some point I think that will shift and become much easier to navigate.
I will just encourage you now that it absolutely will shift. And there will be times where your teenagers come into the kitchen, they're like, what can I eat? What can I eat? I'm hungry. What can I eat? But yeah, certainly sitting around the table, it does get easier. The challenge is getting them to the table off their screens. It's like a whole new season.
So I think that sitting down as a family at least 5 times a week. We are really mindful of how we talk about food in our family. So we don't talk about it in the sense of kind of calories. We don't talk about good and bad food. I very much have taken the approach that my toddler can have what he wants. So obviously when he was under a year, we had rules in place, kind of NHS guidance rules around sugar, kind of things like that. But now it is very much like what you want to have, you can have. And I think although there are a few things that we're slightly hung up on at the moment, I think actually it feels like it's kind of worked. To the extent actually this morning I took him out for the morning. They've got a toddler cinema in Bristol. So I went to toddler cinema with him, and there was a chocolate brownie, and he had it. He ordered it. Like, we chose that as our chocolate brownie, because you get a cake and a coffee with your ticket. And he didn't want it. He sat there and it was just left untouched the entire film. Then I asked him afterwards, he didn't want it. And at some point this afternoon, I'm sure he'll have it. But it's for me, that is actually like, that's a real positive.
Yeah, like that's powerful.
Instead of it being like something that, I'm not allowed to have, so I'm going to have it now, so that it doesn't disappear.
Yeah, like that scarcity mindset of, if I don't eat it right now, it won't be there later. But you can actually listen to your body. Do I want it right now, as opposed to I have to eat it, otherwise it might go away or something.
No, exactly. And then I think the other thing for us is, like, obviously he's a very active toddler, so again we talk about food more as in, if you have this it will give you energy, if you have this it's really good for your hair, so kind of again just framing it in different ways. And it's don't get me wrong, like, it's hard at points. Over the summer he was obsessed with ice cream, and it was really difficult because he didn't understand the difference between like a homemade ice lolly and a shop bought one. And you can't explain that to a toddler. They don't understand it. And I also didn't want to be like, well, this one's healthy, that one's not healthy. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So again, it's like trying to frame things in the right way. And also I think I think allowing that conversation as they get older to kind of develop and flow. And if you've got older kids who come home one day and they're like, I can't eat that because it's got this in it, or I can't eat this because of something I read on Instagram, or whatever it might be. Again, like, having that conversation, why do you think that's factually correct? Like, why can't you have that? I do a lot of work in schools, and there was a school in North London, and all the girls in sixth form, it was an all-girls school, went through this phase of all having exactly the same thing for lunch. And it was basically like, it was so restrictive and so disordered. And I went in to do some work with the school, and I was like, well, where's this come from? And one of the girls was like, we saw it on TikTok or whatever it was. An influencer had it. And I was like, but what credentials does that influencer have to be sharing that? So I think trying to have conversations with your families around stuff like that, again, can be really powerful, and getting them to understand that actually a lot of the beliefs and the fears around food come from people who have no idea what they're talking about. And I think, again, we look at it now from a more topical, with all the conversations around ultra processed food. Again, like, ultra processed food's not ideal if you have it all the time, but actually for some people it's all they can eat, it's all they can afford, perhaps it's also maybe all they allow themselves to eat. And in those sense, actually it's better they have something to eat than don't have anything at all. So again, just for me, having whatever you want to have in moderation is totally fine. And that's the message that I will pass on to my children. Amazing. And hopefully it should be.
I remember actually when one of my kids was a baby, they weren't drinking enough. It was after they had stopped breastfeeding. And they just weren't drinking enough. They wouldn't really drink water. And I can remember going to the doctor at the time, sort of saying, I don't know how to get enough fluids in my child. And the doctor was basically like, do they like squash? Do they like juice? Do they like all these things that at the time you would have thought like, it's not really ideal to give to a child who is like, I don't know, must have been between 1 and 1.5 or something. And the doctor was just like, whatever they will drink, let them drink it. It's more important that they drink right now than that they don't. And I can just remember at the time being like, oh, okay, I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting like, well, you should make your child drink this, that, or the other. But I'd love to know, you mentioned that you went to an Alpha course in 2019. Tell us a bit about your faith journey alongside this. Like, did you grow up in a home that there was talk about God, or have you encountered Jesus later in life? What's been your faith journey?
So I grew up going to church. So kind of from the age of probably since I was born up until I was about 17. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the social part of it. I really enjoyed the singing. But I didn't really believe it. I kind of went for the social part of it. I did all the kind of summer camps, things like that. And had always had fun on them. But unfortunately, when I was sexually abused, it happened in a church environment by a church youth leader. And I think for me, I think for me, the church became quite an unsafe space for quite a long time. And although I'd go to stuff still, I was in that space where I was kind of longing for something, but it was just so I ended up, when I was admitted to hospital, when I was 17, kind of just being like, this is not for me. Like, I can't do this anymore. I went maybe 2 or 3 times when I was at uni. Again, for that social side of things, I dated a guy for a bit at uni who did go to church. And I did turn up at church on a Sunday, really hungover from the night before, kind of rocked up just to see him. Felt really judged a lot of the time, actually, by a lot of people there. And I don't know whether, again, that was me putting that on myself, but I was kind of quite wild in that sense at uni. So I think I didn't really just fit in that environment at all. And what I did notice, though, when I was at uni was one of my friends in my second year at uni ended his life. And I do remember after that, actually, a load of the Christians were really supportive. And they had like this, I don't know what it was. There was just something about them that was really different from everybody else. And even now, actually, sometimes when I look at them, like when they pop up on my Facebook feed or Instagram, I'm like, God, they still have that. And I can't work out, I still don't know what it is. I'm like, it's just that level of peace or something. So I kind of then graduated, kind of never really looked back to that kind of church environment at all. In 2016, I went to court around the sexual abuse that happened to me as a child. And it kind of, everything obviously came back up. And during that period, I really began to question everything, everything that happened, everything that was going on. And my godmother, who I talked to a lot about kind of, life and everything, she convinced me to go back to a church environment and to just, I think, as a bit of maybe as an exposure thing, whatever it might be. So I went a couple of times to a church in London, and again, I really enjoyed the singing. Again, I really enjoyed the atmosphere when you're in there. I didn't really talk to many people. I'd kind of sneak in at the back, kind of sit there, and then kind of leave quite quickly afterwards. But eventually she convinced me to do an Alpha course. And that was when I began to kind of really kind of get to the nitty gritty, asked loads of really challenging questions. I basically went with the attitude that I wanted to prove my godmother wrong. And that's why I was doing it.
It's the best time and place to go on an Alpha course.
But it didn't really work in that sense. And then decided whilst I was on the Alpha course, actually, that I did believe this and I wanted to kind of give it a go. And I say that and know that I have had since then, there's been moments where I have really felt really strong in my faith, and then moments where I felt like it's just not at all, and kind of felt up and down. I still get really frustrated by the way things are in the world. I get frustrated about my mental health, although from an eating disorder perspective, I'm in a really good space. I've had a really bad postnatal depression, so it's kind of like, again, kind of understanding why this sort of stuff happens, like what's actually going on. And I think sometimes, you as a Christian, I've always longed for that quick fix and for life to just be perfect. And it doesn't work like that. And having to kind of work through that sort of stuff, I have found really difficult at times. And sometimes I don't know how to pray. I don't know how to read my Bible at points. And you just sit there and you kind of flood yourself with music and you feel better for it. And you know that actually, things are going to be okay. But I think it is, a work in progress. And I think a lot of the time, I think everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of people, I think you go on these courses and you expect like these miracles to happen and you're kind of holding out faith for that. And then when it doesn't, it can feel just really unfair. But I think for me, a big thing with my whole journey has been, giving myself space to just feel frustrated and angry about it. And then having people that I can then actually work through this with and have these conversations with.
Yeah.
And at point, and have those moments, I don't know, probably we all do, where, I don't know, where something happens and you're like, oh, that is so good. And you kind of like laugh at
You're like,
yourself
oh,
for being a bit of an
okay.
idiot. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
This is, and I think that even actually this year, like I've really struggled to trust God with how things have turned out. And and there's been things that have happened and I'm like, okay, yeah, that's God. Or I don't know, little things. And you kind of feel that nudge when it happens and you're like, okay, cool. Like I need to get better at that. And I need to try to just, trust and know that that's okay. And trust that it's in God's timescale, not in mine.
Yeah.
Which I say,
and that can be
make it
so
sound
hard.
so easy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head when you said that we just want a quick fix. We want to kind of like have our faith and our walk with Jesus as another thing we can just tick off our to-do lists, like done, okay, sweet, all in fine in that area of my life. Now I'm going to like switch to something else. And the reality is we can't just put God in a box, and he also doesn't do whatever we want him to do all the time. And we do have these times of wild unbelief or disbelief where it feels like the rug's been pulled out from underneath us and we're like, what the heck, I'm building my whole life. I have these moments too, and I think it's really helpful to say it's important to be real and acknowledge where we're at and not pretend that we're like these perfect, shiny, smiley Christians all the time, because that doesn't serve anyone and it's not real. And we're only fooling ourselves because God knows where we're at anyway. And the beauty is when we allow ourselves to be real and to, as you say, be angry if we're angry, or feel the rage, or question like, why is this happening? And that doesn't mean we'll get the answer all the time, but it's okay to ask the question. I'm a big fan of encouraging people to be real. And if it's like, I feel like I should be reading my Bible and I'm not reading my Bible, like that's okay. Talk to God about that. Like, why do you feel like you should? Do you want to because you feel like pressure from externally, or is it because you do want to read it but it feels hard or dry, or you're not sure when in the day to read it because you're just tired? And I think if we just bring the reality of our situations to God, he can work with us when we show up real.
Yeah.
If we're showing up pretending to be in a place we're not, then he's kind of got to wait for us to give him permission to meet us where we're really at. But I totally agree with you. We can have these seasons where it's great and it's like we're on the top of the mountain and everything's fireworks and shiny and the Lord is so near and like all our answers to prayer are coming exactly as we would hope. And then there are these other times and he feels distant or silent, or we're not even sure if we're talking to thin air when we're praying. And it's in those times, it's a bit like the neuroplasticity and the repetition of how we rewire ourselves for health in other ways. It's in those times that sometimes just coming back again, even if we don't feel it, and being like, well, God, I don't feel it. I'm not sure if you're there, but I'm going to show up anyway and trust that you're in control and you're bigger than my understanding. You're bigger than my feelings in this. This theme of again and again and having to repeat things, having to speak truth over ourselves, those things that are positive about what God says about our image and who we are, even if we don't feel it. The power of words, the power of hearing these things all plays a part, I think, is super, super biblical. So one of the things that in all your understanding and research and lobbying and campaigning, can you speak to some of the stigmas that people with eating disorders might face, and maybe how we can do better in community in that area?
Yeah, so I think firstly, when we think about eating disorders, we all think of that kind of white teenage underweight girl who's got anorexia. And I think everyone does it. And for me, it stops so many people reaching out for support. We know that actually only 6% of the people with an eating disorder will ever be underweight. So you've got this 94% cohort of people who will never look that stereotypical way. And for them, there's this additional layer of shame, guilt for reaching out, things like that. I think, again, we know that whilst it does affect females more, it also does affect males. And I think it's now around 25% of eating disorders are males. And again, we need to be talking more about that. And I think as well, there's still this, with the lack of understanding, it's still very much seen as a choice. Like, is someone choosing to be difficult? Like, why can't someone just eat? Why can't someone just have a normal relationship with food, with exercise? And again, for me, that's where like all of the science comes in. Is actually, we know that it's not a choice. We know that it's not someone choosing to be difficult or anything like that. And we know it's not a vanity exercise gone wrong. It's not about someone wanting to be stick thin. It's an eating disorder. It's a serious mental health issue. And the more we talk about it, looking at the science and looking at the genetics, I think that will help people to reach out for support and feel able, again, to get that support around this more.
So for those who have, who maybe have held back because they don't fit that stereotypical model of what people imagine in their mind somebody with an eating disorder would look like, or those people who think like, well, I don't fit that category, or I'm not in this place, and maybe they're just feeling a bit hopeless and a bit at a loss. Is there hope? Are eating disorders treatable? Can there be freedom? What's the prognosis?
Yeah, so they can, and the research shows no matter how long you've been unwell for, no matter how severe the eating disorder is, people can and do recover at any stage of illness. I think the really scary thing at the moment is the lack of treatment, the lack of resources out there for people, the huge amounts of stigma attached. We've seen a really scary narrative over the last 18 months or so where people with eating disorders are being marked as untreatable. There's been a huge conversation in the States that's now come over to the UK, where they're saying that people with anorexia should have treatment with kind of removed after a certain amount of time. And we are seeing more cases of people with anorexia, particularly being moved onto palliative care pathways here in the UK and having that treatment withdrawn because they're marked as too complex.
Gosh.
And that's for me, it's so wrong. It's a huge injustice that people are facing. And one of the things at the moment that we're really lobbying on is actually looking at how can we prevent eating disorder deaths when they should not be happening. No one should be dying of an eating disorder, and the fact that people do is disgusting. And a lot of that, I think, is down to, again, the lack of training, the lack of understanding, but also the clinicians who've just given up on people when actually that shouldn't happen. With OCD, as an example, if you don't respond to treatment, you get given multiple treatment options. With eating disorders, you get given one option. If you don't respond to it, you're out.
Wow, okay.
They were doing, a huge amount of work on it. And I think for me, again, that's why if you are someone who feels so defeated by this, maybe you're someone who's been turned away from services, or you've tried to get support and have been labelled as too complex or untreatable, like try and get a second opinion. Go back to your doctor, like really try. And I know it's difficult, but advocate for yourself, because actually the problem isn't the individual, the problem's the system. And we need to make sure that people are getting the right support, people are getting treated the right way. I've got a friend who was diagnosed as terminal. She left treatment. She then tried, I think she had this moment where she was reading some letters from people who had fully recovered, and she'd been unwell for 38 years.
Wow.
And she's now been fully recovered for 15 years because she went and got different treatment, saw someone else, had someone that just believed in her that she could recover, had someone who helped her refeed her brain and get that place to a place where she was able
amazing.
to wire it. And I think that's the thing, we need to hold on to those stories. And if we are stuck in the midst of it, again, just kind of trying to push for that change.
That's amazing. So if somebody wants to find out more, if they want to either find out more of what you're doing and the work that you are doing, advocating and lobbying, where are the best places for them to go to connect online?
Yeah, so probably the best place is on Instagram. So either my name, so Hope Virgo, or we've got a Dump the Scales Instagram page as well. On both of those, there's a lot of updates around campaigning. There's also people who share their stories on there, which again is, I think, is a really powerful space to kind of look and see that as well. And then we also have a website, which is just dumpthescales.org. Again, kind of highlighting various campaigns that we're working on, and also ways, like if people want to get involved to support the work, whether that's through sharing your experiences or through signing open letters or getting draft letters to send to the Prime Minister, things like that as well.
Amazing. Hope, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing some of your story and also sharing the hope, how ironic that it's your name or not, that that hope is possible. You know, it's not a dead end, regardless of how long you might have been struggling in this area or how many times previously you might have sought help. There are options and there are ways forward. So I just wonder if you would just do us the honor of praying for anyone who's been listening.
Sure. So, Heavenly Father, I thank you for this space, a space where we can talk about eating disorders, disordered eating, mental health issues. And I pray for all those who've listened to this today, people who maybe it resonates with, people who, are supporting loved ones, people who are feeling really defeated in themselves. And I just pray, Lord, for breakthrough for them. I pray that they can seek the right support, surround themselves with the right people, but also they can feel this closeness to you in all of this, in a space where they feel that they can be really honest with things. And I particularly pray for those who maybe have had eating disorders for a really, really long time, who feel really stuck right now. And I pray that, they can kind of seek you in this, but also that they can know that actually on the other side of that fear, everything will be okay and everything will work itself out, and help them to just turn the kind of fear around that into something that can be a really joyful, kind of peaceful place as well. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Hope, thank you so much for joining us on Grow and Go today. It's been such a delight to have you.
No, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening in and hanging out with me today. If this encouraged you, why not share it with a friend? Or I would love it if you could take a second to rate and review. It really helps more people find the show so they can press in and move forward. And if you want to stay connected, you can find me on Instagram at HelloMTyler or over on Substack at mtyler.substack.com. I would so love to see you there. Until next time, let's keep growing and going.